Hey guys, welcome back. Chapter 11, Video 1. Today we're going to talk about the origins and the beginning of the Great Depression. But as always, before we get to history, first my joke. Which I'll tell you, I am embarrassed to tell you this one. Even more embarrassed than when I sang in the other video. But anyways, where does a general keep his armies? In his sleeveys. So I'm not even going to tell you to pause it and laugh because I know that one is awful. So anyways, we'll get back to U.S. history and we'll talk about the Great Depression and why it began. So before we really talk about the Great Depression, and there's always a myth as to kind of how it starts, and we'll get to that. But first, anytime something goes bad, we have to look at who do we blame. And it's kind of funny because I say that, but we don't blame ourselves. And especially in the economy, if something goes bad, we automatically blame the president. But anyways, last time we finished talking, we talked about Calvin Coolidge and what he was going to be like as president. But in 1928, he decides that he is going to step down. Much like every president before him, they follow the George Washington's precedent of, I'm serving 2 terms, and after those 2 terms, I'm out. They're going to leave office. So anyways, he steps down, and Herbert Hoover, he steps in. And Herbert Hoover, we've talked about him a lot. He was very, very influential during World War I. He was in charge of the Food Administration. We talked about some of those jobs that he did. He was the Secretary of Commerce under Warren Harding. Again, he was one of the most influential. He was successful under the Harding administration. He wasn't a part of that Ohio gang. And he was also Secretary of Commerce during Calvin Coolidge's administration as well. So it's pretty easy for him to win the Republican nominee. And really, at this time, Republicans had been in power for quite some time during the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties. It was almost seen as it was going to be easy for a Republican to win. So to counter it, of course, the Democrats aren't just going to throw in the towel. They are going to have somebody who is going to run. So they are going to choose Alfred Smith, who was the governor of New York, the state of New York, for 4 years, but he had not been in public office for over 12 years. And I think that kind of hurt him a little bit. But there's other things that were issues as well. So now in 1928, it's going to be Herbert Hoover versus Al Smith. One of the biggest issues still was Prohibition. I know we discussed that at length, and I talked to each of you individually about it. But Prohibition, the idea of manufacturing, selling, and transporting alcohol, it was a failure because it really was just impossible for people to regulate it. And when I say people, I'm more talking about law enforcement. So Prohibition is going to be a big deal. But really the biggest one was religion. And Al Smith, he is Roman Catholic. He's actually the first Roman Catholic to actually run for the presidency. And the reason that this becomes an issue is Protestants at the time were fearful of Catholics. They thought that the Catholics would take over the government and that they would finance the government. And this is a big fear. Herbert Hoover tells people, he's a Quaker, he's a pacifist, but Herbert Hoover tells people that is completely wrong. So it's kind of funny to look at, here you have the media and you have all these people who are trashing Al Smith, his opponent, for being Catholic, and he's like, hey guys, there's nothing wrong with that. We just have a disagreement on issues. And, to me, I look at it as like President Trump standing up for Hillary Clinton with the email scandal and saying, hey, FBI, we did our job. We're done. We don't need to talk about it anymore. It's just so funny how politics have changed. But anyways, Herbert Hoover, he easily wins the Electoral College with a final vote of 444 to 87. And he is very, very confident. I'll read you one of the quotes from his inauguration address. He says, I have no fears for the future of our country. It is bright with hope. And boy, he could not be any more wrong. Because 1929, the stock market crashes. Now, when the stock market crashes, it's kind of almost like the unofficial start of the Great Depression. Now, in all reality, about 10% of the citizens of the United States had money in the stock market. So, it was a part of the economic downturn, but it was a very, very small point. And today we're going to focus more on the other issues that were at hand. So the first thing we'll talk about is banks. Now, banking was, I guess you could say, almost a little bit corrupt. The banking system was a complete failure at this time. And really, it was a failure because it was not insured and they were making risky business decisions. But really, what banks were doing, they were lending money to stock speculators because people just thought stocks, it's a get-rich-quick scheme. They always go up. So if you're going to be really spending money and buying things in the stock market, you are going to make a fortune. You are going to make a killing. So the banks, they loan this money out to people. They think they're going to get a return on their investment because, hey, I'm going to charge 10% interest or something along those lines. Now all of a sudden, stocks start to fall. Speculators default on their loans. And who's going to cover the cost? Nobody. So because nobody can recover the cost, banks, they're going to be forced to close. Banks didn't have enough money on hand. They were taking people's monies for savings and checking accounts and stuff like that. And they were taking, say if I put $10,000 in the bank, they were taking that $10,000 and loaning it out to other people. Now, with that idea of getting a higher investment, now they can no longer issue loans. Because they don't have the money, they can't have any loans. That's how a bank makes money. Off of interest rates, off of loans. You know, if you have a savings account, you get money back from that. You get an interest rate as well. It's very, very minimal. When you guys get an actual loan, you'll see the difference in how much you get based on your interest rates and how much they get. But really what this is going to do, it's going to lead to something known as bank runs. And here's a picture on the right is an image of a bank run. These depositors, people who had money in the banks, they realized that banks were about to close. So because of that, they showed up in masses and they all ran to the banks and try to withdraw their money at one time. And as I said, they don't have all the money. So if they don't have the money, what are they going to do? They're going to close. And what happens to your $10,000 that you invested in the banks? It's gone. So people's life savings and everything is gone as soon as those banks close. So we have stock market crash. We have banks are closing. Next one we have uneven distribution of income. Now, overproduction, I guess talking about that as a third point, is also going to be a major key to the Great Depression. We have more technology at this time. Just like today, we try to have the newest and the greatest technology to produce things as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. Now, this starts during the Great Depression as well. So, production increases at about a rate of 32%, but wages only increase by about 8%. So this more efficient machinery is producing too many goods. So really warehouses and these companies who are producing things like radios and cars, refrigerators, things that people are now buying, they're just going to have to sit in the factory. They aren't selling them. So because of that, they're not selling any products. What happens to those people's jobs? They're lost. People are fired. These jobs are gone. They cease to exist. So that more efficient machinery is really going to be hurting a lot of the people. So now when they lose their job, again, they can't buy anything else. On top of that, credit was wildly popular. And because credit was so popular, people were buying things with money they didn't have. So, kind of going through that example again, you have car payments, you have refrigerator payments, you have radio payments, mortgage. So now it's 4 things. On top of that, you also have your groceries. You have your housing payment. You have your mortgage. And when you lose your job, you can't pay any of that back. So what happens? Well, you have to sell your car. You have to give your radio back. You're going to try to sell everything else. And most likely, you're going to be homeless. You're going to be out on the streets. And really the top 5% in the country earns 30% of the nation's income. That's more focusing on that uneven distribution aspect of it. But anyways, they make so much money while 2/3 earns less than $2,500 per year. And the slowdown really, to talk more about that, the retail sales, if the radios and cars, if they're not selling, that hurts the economy as a whole. Talking about radios, we'll use this for an example. If they aren't making any, well, radios had wood. So now they're not buying wood, so all the lumberjacks, they're going to be out of a job. They also use copper wire. So now if you're trying to sell copper wire, you're out of a job as well. There's also glass tubes. Ohio was very famous for having glass. Now they lose their job. So really, because those types of machines are no longer going to be around, it's going to reverberate throughout the entire economy, and it's going to also assist in the Great Depression. And lastly, mistakes by the Fed. Now, the Fed is going to be a nickname for an organization known as the Federal Reserve. And really, they are put in power, they are put in this position to monitor inflation, to monitor the stock market, monitor the economy, but they kept making mistakes. So this is a group that still is around today, but mostly they just go by the name the Fed, not the Federal Reserve. Now, what they do that really really hurts the economy is they keep interest rates extremely low. Now, the reason this hurts so much is when interest rates are that low, people are going to spend more money. They're going to get more loans because it's looked at as if the economy is doing well, rates are going to be low. But if the economy is doing poorly, then interest rates that go up to, like, say, 25, 30%, and you would be completely crazy, completely out of your mind to buy something at that type of interest rate. So because they keep it so low, everyone just keeps looking, I can spend more money. I can keep borrowing. I can keep buying on credit. Because the Fed, they are the people who know this the most, and they are keeping interest rates low. Therefore, everything's going well. And that's going to be kind of the mindset of the private citizens. Now let's look at more companies and business aspects of it. Banks, they're making more loans as well. Again, they look at the Fed to figure out what these interest rates are going to be. Because they're so low, we can make risky loans. If we don't get that money back, hey, there's going to be somebody else who's going to pay that back. So we're still going to be able to get some form of a profit. So banks are making risky loans, and then also business leaders, they are going to have that corporations expanding. Because again, life is good. We're in the roaring 20s. We're in the jazz age. Things are going well for us. So let's expand, let's spend more money. But all this kind of boils up into the creation of the Great Depression. So again, closing remarks, it's not just the stock market. It's mistakes by the Fed. It's uneven distribution. It's we have way too many factories that are producing way too many things. All of those kind of boil together. Another thing, I know I didn't bring it up, we talked about it before, but the Smoot-Hawley tariff. We're not selling goods overseas anymore as well. So all of this boils down to the Great Depression, and of course, who do we blame? Well, of course, we blame the president.